Advancing Justice, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the organization that is they are co-hosting this event with me, and part of the proceeds from this concert are going to the organization. And we're going to also have a talk back at the end of this performance with Andrea Chu from Advancing Justice. So I want to give a sort of a map of the piece, and maybe start with a thesis. This piece is called The Orient. It's a super loaded word, and the piece was built off of the recognition that the Orient isn't actually a place. It's just an imagined other to the Occident. So with that in mind, I ended up writing this piece as a fantasy, which is somewhat formless and tangential and sort of held together by very thin threads of a train of thought and sort of whatever I want, whatever you kind of take as your instinct in the moment. So that part of it is throughout the whole work. With that said, the actual musical material is pretty focused on one really small little melody. I'll play it for you real quick. And I'm sure you've all heard that. I basically built the entire piece off of those notes, and it was something that became sort of this cathartic experience to play it, and to play it over and over and over again in different ways, and then to eventually generate a full piece of music out of that, out of something I hate. So with that in mind, that kind of ties everything together, even though it's really just a fantasy. So I hope you can relax and just hear the music for what it is in every individual moment. But if you listen closely enough, it's in there the whole way. So the piece is just one big thing, but there are 5 parts to it. The first movement starts with really taking apart every little bit, every little piece of that melody. So it starts with those 4 faster notes on the same note, and that really starts everything off. And then I slowly get through the other parts of those, that really small amount of music. Then you'll hear a really loud, pretty like jolting statement of this theme. And then you'll hear a whole lot of different pentatonic scales, a whole lot of different fantasy moments, episodes. And then you will eventually settle into this train theme. It's kind of like chugging train. It's at a speed that is fast enough where it feels slow, like a wheel that's starting to move on a car, and then it reaches a certain speed and it just looks like a nice smooth line after you saw it actually moving. And that runs through the whole piece. And it's a pretty large first section, and it will go through a few different other sections after that, but the train thing is really what holds together the end of that movement. And then there'll be sort of a break, and you'll hear the next section, which is about basically constant shuffling and reordering of Mandarin intonation flashcards. So to practice the different intonations. So like in a very simple way of saying, it's just there's a fall, a rise, a fall and then rise, and then there's one that stays, and then there's one that's like a dot, kind of thing. So you'll hear that just shuffled and rearranged over and over. And that's really, a personal statement for me about how I felt like I needed to sort of like be Asian and have to like study how to be Asian as an Asian person. And I think that might resonate with a lot of people, a lot of Asian Americans. And then the next movement goes through sort of the train theme again, and it's really a direct reference to the labor of the transcontinental railroad, which was mostly built by Chinese immigrants. And you'll eventually settle that into this quotation of Steve Reich piano phase. And that kind of trails the movement off. And then the next movement is a tribute memorial to Vincent Chin, who was murdered in the 1980s. He was a Chinese, he was a young Chinese man, but he was mistaken for a Japanese man working in the auto industry, and two white a father and son team got so mad at him that they ended up killing him with a baseball bat. And so that's represented in that movement. And then I finally end the piece with something that is hopefully like encouraging and on a positive note for something so heavy. This whole piece is so heavy. And so I wanted to end it with something more hopeful. The theme that there's a lot of quotes in it that are all American and European composers and actual pieces of music. There's Schubert in there. There's Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue in there. But the theme that that's completely made up is sort of the final moment of triumph, and it kind of sits somewhere in this world in between like nostalgic Americana and like nostalgic Chinese nationalism is the best way I could put it. But it's not any melody specifically from anywhere. But I felt like it just occupied this in-betweenness that was really important for me to end on. But it's a very triumphant final ending to this piece. So I would love to thank you all for being here, and I would love to invite you to ask questions in the talk back after the performance. And I hope you enjoy the Orient. Thank you, everyone. We're going to take a 10 to 15 minute break. Feel free to talk, get a drink, do whatever you need to do, and then we'll start the talk back with Andrea Chu from Advancing Justice. Thanks so much, everyone. So I wanted to start the conversation off with Andrea Chu of Advancing Justice, Asian Americans Advancing Justice. And yeah, I wanted to start with just saying my relationship to Chewy and the organization. I volunteered as just a community member, went to meetings for quite a few years, and then started to do more of a leadership role as a community member in the core leader group, and that's where I met a lot of these wonderful people, and Chewy as well during those years. And it's been, for me, like 4 years ago now, 5 years ago. So a lot has happened since then. I think you can all agree. And yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, this organization means a lot to me, and Chewy as well, specifically Chewy on stage here and others that are in the audience, because it gave me a place to really, like, you know, ground myself in my Asian identity, which felt very in flux and not grounded and just very stressful to try to figure out by yourself. So the organization provided that for me, and it has helped me be a better person to this day. So they still do this work, obviously, and have been doing it since I left. But I thought this was a perfect opportunity to bring us all together around this super specific themed composition that I just did today for you. So welcome to Andrea Chu of Advancing Justice.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so my name is Andrea Chu. I also go by Chewy. I use she and they pronouns, and I am the Chicago and Midwest organizing manager at Asian Americans Advancing Justice. And I just want to, on behalf of our organization, say thank you so much, Shi-An, for not just this beautiful piece, but also for inviting us here tonight. We're super excited. This event is actually kicking off a whole month of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month events. So we're really excited to start off with you here today.
Right, so can you give us like some ways to get involved this month? You know, this is the eve of Asian Pacific Heritage Month, so you know, we're right at, at midnight tonight it starts. So
yes.
Can you sort of give us some ideas for ways we can get involved? Also maybe update on like what's going on right now currently and has been going on and will continue to happen through this month with Advancing Justice?
Yeah, absolutely. So Advancing Justice, we build power through collective organizing and advocacy to achieve racial equity. And so that's our mission. And so all of the work that we do is towards that kind of North Star goal. So this month is very busy. So it is, quote unquote, our month. And so we have a lot of activities going on, from different happy hours you can be a part of. There are some flyers out in the lobby if you want to scan that QR code to find out what kinds of fun stuff we have going on. But we also are doing some more serious work as well. So next week, 300 Asian American community members are going down to Springfield to lobby for all kinds of things that we think that our communities deserve. And one of our big priorities is around language access. So one of the things about the Asian American community is that we speak a lot of different languages, and we want to be able to have our community members have access to different government services that other communities have easier access to. So that's one of our main goals for this month. And we also know that we have a new administration here at the city level, and so we're really pushing a lot of public safety priorities as well. But we do all kinds of work, from education equity to voting rights and a bunch of other things as well. And so those are the things that we have going on. And for folks who want to get involved, of course, you can join our fun activities around Heritage Month, but you can also take our public bystander intervention training classes that are over Zoom. So we know that the Asian American community has seen a lot of violence over the past couple of years due to the pandemic and other things. And so if you are interested in, as just kind of a general member of the public who wants to intervene in these instances of bias, our training is a really great way to start doing that. And then if you are Asian American and identify as Asian American, you can also join the group that Shi-An was a part of. And so that group is called Address Shy. We meet every month, and this is a great way for you to get involved if you want to learn a little bit more about organizing, particularly with other Asian Americans, and find community to, investigate some of the themes that Shi-An's piece really also dug into today. Yeah.
All right, yeah, so let's give that applause for everything they're doing.
Yeah, thank you. But I actually have a question for you, Shi-An. I got very emotional during this piece, and there were so many really beautiful and melancholy moments in it. And I'm really curious about your process in building a whole piece around a very simple and short riff. It has such a clear cultural meaning, and it's so short and simple and can so quickly get a rise out of me because it is so loaded, like you said before. And so how have you experienced this riff, and kind of like what are the kind of musical influences that were present when you were writing this piece?
Right, yeah, so that riff is obviously like just in pop culture, and you get it like for random like teasing and stuff, and it's like kind of it's always been there since childhood. But in this particular piece, like there's the musical influences are mostly Western, and it's because I'm here in the West. I live here in Chicago, and I was born and raised in the U.S. and everything, and Midwest. My upbringing is here, so it seemed like oddly fitting to actually just quote a bunch of American and European composers in a piece called The Orient, because it's kind of what Orientalism did for centuries to, it's kind of what the Occident did to the Orient for centuries, I should say, and kind of just projecting their own ideas and sort of kind of making a mess of the whole thing. So I kind of continued that mess in a way that like criticizes the mess and says like this is stupid and it needs to stop, and it has in a lot of ways stopped. Like I don't think it's as easy to write a super like stereotypical like article in like a big newspaper nowadays, but it's still there and it's still a problem. So yeah, the musical influences were actually like very like very centered in Americana and American minimalism and like things that I really love musically, but it used the Asian riff for all of it and tried to make music out of those notes. So yeah, it's super loaded, and I think one thing I want to add is that like just hearing it was like super hard and like really embarrassing and difficult to like actually play. So that sort of like anxiety and discomfort was something I spent a lot of time trying to feel good about, because obviously you can't write a piece about this unless you can feel okay about playing it. And that was kind of like what made this piece into a bigger thing, because it was just an idea and I just had this like in my head as an earworm, and I realized like this is like actually pretty important to like try to like take back and use, because it's already there, and it's something that we as Asian Americans should actually like reclaim and make something of it. So yeah, that's sort of the idea behind that. Mm-hmm. Right, if that makes sense. Is that okay? Is that an okay answer?
Yeah. No, and like thank you for bringing that, because I actually really didn't think about what it would feel like to play something that is so loaded, and that that you said that you hated the riff in the beginning. And so I appreciate you talking through what it was like to learn to be okay with playing it in general. And I'm so glad you did, because it really took me on the journey, and I really appreciate you also sort of framing it at the beginning and giving us that map, and I was really able to follow the map that you laid out at the beginning, and really go on that journey with you.
Great, thank you. I think just keep in mind too that, you know, we can also have a conversation. At a certain point, we'll open it up. So if you have something you want to like share or comment on or ask to either one of us or openly to the group, feel free to just let that be something you can say, and yeah, don't be shy. So yeah, I wanted to ask, I guess sort of a lead into this would be, I wanted to ask you something about your identity and yourself. So like, I'm from Chicago and I'm like mixed race. I'm like Irish and Chinese, Taiwanese heritage and stuff. So that's my like personal sort of bubble in a way, like, and that's kind of what I'm working from. And you know, the Orient is like this huge thing. So like the idea of the Orient, I should say. So how do you, as an Asian American, from your experiences growing up, from your lived realities in the past and currently, how do you make sense of all of that, of like the idea of the Orient?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I, you know, share some parts of that identity that you named. I'm also Chinese Taiwanese, also grew up in the Midwest, although I'm from Ohio. And I think one of the things that I want everyone to keep in mind when we talk about the Asian American identity is also just that there is such a broad depth of diversity in our community, even between you and I, right? That, you know, share like, you know, pretty large commonalities in our identity, but that we can experience that in such different ways. You know, and I think, you know, we've been going through this organizing training this weekend, and that was where I was right before this. We really talked a lot about the Asian American identity with a lot of folks who are in a Just Shy, who want to learn more about their own heritage, and I think that in itself is something that is really grounding, because I think such a foundational part of being Asian American is being kind of in between, or not enough for them and not enough for them either. And there is such, I think, pain in that experience too, of not feeling like you belong in, you know, your wherever you grew up, while also not particularly belonging where your parents came from either. So I spent a couple of years in Taiwan, and I've never felt more American than when I was in Taiwan. And yet here, like in the US, you know, there are so many assumptions about the fact that I am perhaps not American because I look the way that I do. And so, you know, I think what you mentioned about, you know, advancing justice before, providing that space for you to kind of be with other people is so important, because I think the collective feeling of like, oh, you know, our experiences are actually not ones that you have to experience by yourself, that other people have similar experiences too, is really important to you being able to feel grounded in your own body and knowing who you are. And so, yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but that's kind of, you know, some of the explorations that we have. And, you know, I think being able to feel flexible about being in between is also something that I strive to feel, even if it isn't always successful.
Yeah. Just to kind of like riff on that, you know, you were saying how when you were did you say when you were in Taiwan you felt super American?
Mm-hmm. And everyone knew I wasn't from there. They
Right.
could tell. Even though this is what I look like.
Yeah. And then when you're in the US, you feel pretty Asian? In contrast, or?
I mean, not because I feel Asian, but that people are constantly reminding me that they see me as not American, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I think that's just a reminder that that is external, right?
Right. So does that not like really like breach the barrier of who you know as yourself, or do you feel like that actually gets in there and makes you think you are? Like, because you kind of said you don't feel Asian, but people think you're Asian here. Is that what you were saying? Or do you feel like you're grounded in being Asian as an identity, and people are also throwing that at you here, but sometimes you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the perception and like the feeling is really different. So like, I'm obviously Asian American, I'm Taiwanese American, and these are identities that are super important to me. And also, I really don't love it when somebody comes up to me and makes assumptions about who I am, mm-hmm. right? Like, it is also about the agency that I have to define who I am, and not to have people assume anything about me when they really don't know anything about me. And I think that is part of what makes it feel different. But like, yeah, I'm very Asian American, and I feel really connected to my heritage. And you know, I spend most of my time doing things with other Asian Americans. So I think it's about the agency and also being able to define yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I have similar feelings, but more within different groups of friends and communities that you have to sort of code switch. But as a mixed race person, and maybe others feel this way too, like you get sort of like, and sometimes for a compliment, but you're always
we all
like
know that underhanded compliment.
then the thing that you're not in the group is like what's picked out, and so you know you're like the white one in the Asian group, and you're the Asian one in the white group. So yeah, and that's just part of like humanity that tends to like see things and go, oh, there's one different thing over there. So yeah, and what you're saying is interesting because it also exists within different communities in the United States, like without taking a plane anywhere, without going anywhere. So yeah, that sort of stuff is very you know, and it's not something to be proud of, like necessarily for me, but it's just like something. It's a variable in the equation to like kind of store away and be like, okay, that's what they think of that. Okay, interesting. And you go on trying to become a little more clearly defined for yourself through, you know, because you are what other people see in you too. Like that is part of it, right?
Yeah,
we have
absolutely.
to like get feedback from others to help understand who we are and how we are perceived. So
yeah, I mean, and I think what was so great about the piece that you just performed too is that it was incredibly emotional and specific and personal. And so I'm really curious too, what was it like for you to write something that was so personal, particularly understanding the larger like historical and political context that underlies this piece, you know, especially at a time where there is heightened violence against Asian Americans.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it's hard because like any group, any racial identity or whatever, right, racialized group is not a monolith. So I try to stay in my lane in that sense. Like I try to do things that meant something to me as a male identifying Asian American. So you know, I had other like ideas for things that I was like, oh, that's important too, but I can't really include it because I'm not, you know, I'm not that. And so there was a big part of it was staying in my lane and just trying to do what resonates with me, you know, throughout history and in current times. But yeah, so like it was written through basically from, you know, the last year or so, and it was an idea for maybe longer than that. I'm not really sure when it started to germinate. But yeah, like the last few years, I guess, have been pretty intense for us Asian Americans, for us Asian people living here in the States. And, you know, I think there was something, I had a mix of like pride because we were like finally actually mentioned as a group of people in the United States, but like super depressed because it was over the worst possible like thing. Like it wasn't anything positive. It was like, hey, let's stop like hating these people. So, you know, I felt like a lot of my activist work was for advocating for bigger things that kind of sort of like obliquely affected Asian Americans, like immigrant rights, refugee rights, not like specifically for Asian Americans, if that makes sense. And that was like one of the first times where I like was actually marching for like stop API hate, like actually specifically for like who I am, like. And I realized that, and it was just like, wow, it's like pretty cool, like it's great, but it has to be for this, like it's a response to something terrible. So it'd be nice if it wasn't always like, okay, terrible thing, then response, like Vincent Chin, which is one of the movements in, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth on today.
Yeah. Yeah, so to speak on that a little bit, I think, yeah, we saw this immense rise in violence against Asian Americans, which has kind of moved out of the news cycle a little bit, but that level of violence has actually stayed pretty steady. We just don't talk about it as much as we did last year or the year before. And one of the things that we talk about at Advancing Justice when we are thinking about, violence against Asian Americans as a whole is that this didn't come from nowhere, right? And it is not actually new. Narratives about Asian people are very old and very pervasive, and often come up in times of economic distress. And so, when you sort of reference and give memorial to Vincent Chin, a lot of people don't know what happened to him and don't learn about how he was murdered until, much later in their lives, especially Asian Americans, because we don't teach any of that history here. But there is such a clear connection from the violence that he suffered to the violence that is happening now. And so we do actually have like a video to share a little bit more context around Vincent Chin's case. But I do want to give a content warning. There is both discussion and imagery of violence in this video. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So this is a little bit of historical context around that.
Detroit, 1982 was the year the recession became depression.
They had this idea that Japan was taking over the American economy.
U.S. auto jobs being lost to Japanese manufacturers.
Choked by imports and fighting for survival, the American auto industry and its army have targeted Japan as a major source of its problems.
We are being shot at and shot up by the Japanese.
I said, if I were president of the United States for 2 months, I said I'd fix the Japanese like they've never been fixed.
Many of their verbal bullets aimed at the Japanese government and car makers have strayed off course and are hitting home instead.
Vincent Chin is Chinese American.
It was the day before his wedding, and he was just trying to have a good time, maybe get a drink. He's this young Chinese American guy.
These two white guys, Ronald Evans and Michael Nitz.
And we look out, and I see guys fighting out there in the club.
Mr. Evans and Mr. Nitz jumped out from behind the truck.
Mr. Evans swung a bat, repeatedly striking Mr. Chin.
The man was a goner.
And in what outraged the Asian community, both escaped a 15-year prison term.
Yeah, we all were surprised that they didn't come to us and ask us what happened.
Didn't you have then the responsibility to ask for the other side of the case before you handed down the sentence?
Bill, I am the presiding judge in the criminal division of the Wayne Circuit Court. I have approximately 50 sentences every week.
When you have two police officers as eyewitnesses to any type of crime, I believe both officers should have been notified for court. Both officers should have went to court.
The only thing that really bugs me is that the response, especially from people in the legal community, has been that these things happen all the time.
In light of how many people go out of their way to antagonize people that look different than them, at least in this part of the country, it's surprising that there hasn't been more than one Vincent Chin incident.
Almost a generation later, in what ways do we see Vincent Chin's story repeat itself today?
COVID-19, I said, that's an odd name. I could give you many, many names. Kung flu, yeah.
I called for help, but nobody came for help.
And also the mocking tone, the bullying, there's really no coincidence that that stoked and inflamed anti-Asian sentiment. And no matter how many contributions Asian Americans make to the United States, that our history isn't taught and that we're still perceived as foreigners or outsiders.
We need to be vigilant, even when it's not in the media headlines. What we're trying to do is disrupt the cycle of violence. Advancing Just Chicago is working on the issues, including police accountability, immigrant rights, language access, coalition building, and grassroots organizing.
Okay, so back to conversation, and if you have questions, we'll open the floor soon for comments or whatever you want to say. But yeah, I wanted to ask, just like after seeing that and just talking as we have, what is going on right now campaign-wise at Advancing Justice, and like what things are being done right now that people should know about?
Yeah, I actually want to start with a piece of legislation that we were able to pass in a couple years ago, which is the Teaching Equitable Asian American Community Histories Act. So this is a piece of legislation in Illinois that requires the teaching of Asian American history in K through 12 education, and it is actually the first bill of its kind in the nation. So many states have followed suit since, but we were the first ones to pass that. So Sung, who's here in the audience, was very instrumental in doing that work. And we are so proud of that work because learning our own histories is something that we feel like is a right that children have, right? And also that it is really so transformational on an individual level to be able to understand your own history and also the history of your community here in the United States. And it really helps somebody understand the forces that shaped their lives and also how to understand systemic oppression. And you know, after the tragedy of Vincent Chin, there was a huge uprise in Asian American organizing in realizing that we have a lot of shared stake in this work, and learning something like that has been really transformational and moving for a lot of Asian Americans that have come through Advancing Justice, and particularly through A Just Shy. And so that is something that we really encourage folks to, learn more about. And if you know of any K through 12 education educators here in Illinois that want to have some professional development around Asian American history, we at Advancing Justice provide professional development for teachers to be able to learn about Asian American history so that they can teach it in their classrooms. So that's one thing that we still offer because of this work that we found super, super important. And you know, that leads so many people into all of the other issues that we are working on at Advancing Justice. So I named language access as one and public safety as another. We also run the largest poll watching program in Chicago, particularly looking at language access. Like, do particular polls have the in-language ballots that they need and the in-language signs that they need so that people are able to exercise that civic right? Those are other things that we do, and we're always looking for volunteers every election to help us with that work. And then, of course, yes, you can join A Just Shy, where we have two working groups. So one is immigrant justice, and the other is around abolition and building community. And so if you're interested in any of those, you can talk to me or any of my friends over here about that work. And we really encourage folks to spend the time to take a little bit of time out of their day every month to learn more about that and be in community.
Great.
So I think I'll just close us out before we open it up for questions. I think one of the last observations that I made was that I really love the arc of your piece, that the composition goes from sort of the West influencing China to the Chinese immigrant experience of labor and assimilation, leading into the case of Vincent Chin. And then all of that is such painful history. But the fact that you end on a movement that has the tagline, like you refuse to be finished, is so encouraging and inspiring to me. And I really love that you end on this note of resilience in the face of white supremacy. And I think that's really, really fitting. So again, thank you so much for this piece and for inviting us to be here today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I think I see a question, and I'll repeat the questions for the live stream, if that's okay. Please let me know if you don't want that, but you're here, so. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was essentially, how does this do I envision this piece, the Orient, fitting into piano repertoire, like the stuff that pianists are playing? And one example was like by Frederick Rzewski, "The People United will never be defeated." It's a pretty political piece, and it's a protest song basically. And it was another work. I didn't write that one. I wish I did. It's really good. Yeah. So, okay. Well, there is for people who aren't in classical music, there's like a huge literature out there, like there is in literature and other in science, everything. That's like Orientalism. And so maybe the most famous piece is by Balakirev. He's a Russian composer, and it's called Islame, an Oriental Fantasy. There's a piece by a lot of American composers. A lot of Russian composers wrote Orientalist pieces. Trying to think. Morton Gould wrote a suite on Asia, on like Asian stuff in a general way. Leo Ornstein wrote something, and there's a lot of stuff out there. So, and it's still played to this day. So people still playing this stuff, and it's kind of caricaturing Asian culture from the Western point of view, and that's kind of what Orientalism is. And so I think in a weird way, it like fits into that in a way to be like, what the heck were we doing, guys? There's so much of this stuff out here with these like, Westerners like romanticizing Asia and like, using that as like kind of a launching point for their creativity. I sort of just did that myself and it just complicated the whole matter, like and just it kind of like sits somewhere like in reference to that, but maybe like post that, you know what I mean? Like I maybe think of it like a post-Orientalism piece called The Orient. I think that's the best answer I could give to that question. It's a good question though. Yes.
That's a great question. I was going to ask you that. We were going to ask each other that, but we didn't get to it. And the question is, in activism, organizing, and policy, what is the role of art? And I think that's a really great question. And, I think it's really vital to organizing activism because I think human beings are creatures that really respond to story, to emotion, and to visuals and like all kinds of art. And so, we talked about a protest chant, so that is one piece, but we also have such a great richness in protest signs and in movies that have the ability to give people an opportunity to dig deeper into social justice issues. And so I think it is a really important role to play because, if I was just gonna talk at you about policy, I'm sure all of you would fall asleep because, so much of the work that we do is kind of dry. It's, getting into the minutia of like, is that allowed? What is this legal case? And like, what's the precedent? But what really humanizes that is the stories that people are able to tell through art. And so, it really makes all of the work that we do come alive and makes it accessible to a larger group of people that really don't want to sit in a room and, talk about the line by line of a bill. And so these things are really important and they impact a lot of people, but it's not the best way to reach people. And the thing that we want most to do as organizers is to reach more people because all of the stuff that we talk about really impacts everyone. And we want to be able to give people an opportunity to engage with it. And art is a really wonderful way to do that. Yeah, do you have anything you want to add, Olsen?
I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think there's like a sort of partnership with activism that art can have. It's not like art just kind of swoops in and helps or vice versa. So like there is this sort of like link there. Like you mentioned protest signs and protest songs. Like they're connected. They're actually part of the same craft to me. Mm-hmm. with that said, I think there's some real ways that art can help. It can give a platform, and it can raise money. I think those are real ways to help that art can do. That's about all I'd add to that. I really liked Chewy's answer. Any other questions? Yes. So talking about sonic violence and the modulation from sonic violence to sonic healing. Is that right? I think this question's for you, Chewy.
So about that.
We were actually going to get there with the question to Chewy about that. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, there's a lot of, I think there's, so a lot of the imagery and a lot of the, there's some like John Luther Adams type stuff is a composer who does a lot of like ecosystem type sounding music. And then I mentioned the train thing where it kind of like goes and revs
Definitely
up,
saw
and
the
keeps
train in my
moving.
mind,
And I'm trying to think if there's anything else specifically. But yeah, so anyway, those kinds of textures in a way kind of wash over us and sort of like smooth things out. So there's kind of like a violence sometimes to like the fastness of something and just like the dugga 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 dugga, you know. But when that dugga 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 becomes da, or if you start, or if just you decide to sit back and like hear the bigger thing, I think there's sort of a healing to that. Kind of smooths out the edges. Yeah, and in terms of the progression of the whole piece, I think there's a lot of violent moments that are trying to get smoothed out. So to answer that question with what I was saying initially, a lot of the ebbs and flows come from presenting edges, presenting the reality of certain jagged things, and then trying to smooth it out. Because the theme itself is pretty like jagged, you know, it's pretty square and sharp to me. So that's a great question. Very good questions. All right. Oh, we have one more. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right, so in terms of being mixed race, so the question is, as being mixed race, how writing this piece affected my identity? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to say like when you're in the middle of it, right, in the moment, because I still feel like in the moment of writing this piece because I just played it for the first time. So, yeah, so it's like hard to like have that sort of perspective on it. I will say though that this was like a really important piece to me just on so many levels that are I think making sense of my identity as a person and it is connected to mixed race stuff, but it's actually about being like an artist and like activist. And I kind of felt like I have to choose one or the other, and I kind of drop away from one part of the activism part to do the art stuff, drop the art stuff. I never really could see how they could be like the same, you know, how we all hang out at the same event. So I think that was really important for me. And that's a large part of, for me, like the struggle of being mixed race is trying to find how they like actually fit together, how these two really different things are gonna like actually coincide and be not in conflict with one another. And how they can really work together to be awesome. So,
You're
great
awesome.
question. Oh, how many more questions do you think?
Up to you.
It's getting later. I know you guys want to like drink and like chill out. Yeah, let's do another question. I mean, feel free to step out too if you want to get a drink or anything like that.
I just feel like this is the question section, so I have to my role. No, this is usual. I'm just wondering how long you spent making the piece. I was just wondering how long you've been on the gestation.
The gestation of it, you said? So what was the gestation of this piece? So it started with sort of the earworm idea that happened maybe like over a year ago now. Maybe a year and a half, I don't know. It's like, it just kind of, like something gets stuck in your head. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of, honestly. But I worked pretty hard on it for like 2 months, but I was kind of working on it for like a year. And I think the score, like my final version, like just settling on things, happened probably in like January or so. Yeah, it's hard to not edit, when you write your own thing. So you always want to like, because a lot of it came from sort of improvisations too, and sort of feeling the flow of how long something should be and when it should change and all that. So it's, depending on the day, you're like, it's got to go longer. Oh no, shorter. So it's that push and pull of that, the editing of the piece takes a really long time. And this piece was really awesome because a lot of time a deadline will just destroy that ability to edit at a certain point and you have to just send it. But this one, I started so early, like before I had any idea of even performing it, that I really came to like a landing point in a really like organic, like comfortable way, rather than trying to speed that process up because of a deadline. So. I think we're good. Well, let's continue these conversations at the bar. And thanks so much again to Advancing Justice. Thank you to Andrea Chu. Thank you to you all for being here tonight.